Blueprint to Your Success Story, Essential Power Words and Workbook, all written by Dr. John A. Chuback, physician and surgeon from New Jersey. I'm Dr. Paul Reeves, your host and moderator, also host of Dr. Paul's Family Talk radio show. Also as part of the panel, Dr. Diane Chuback, CEO of Chuback Medical Group, and Dr. Deborah Waitley, psychologist and author from California. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we take you through the entire book, The Blueprint to Your Success Story, Essential Power Words and Workbook, all written by Dr. John A. Chuback, MD. Welcome to episode 7 of The Blueprint to Your Success Story, Essential Power Words and Workbook, all written by Dr. John A. Chuback, physician and surgeon from New Jersey. Let's meet our panel before we dive into the book today from New Jersey. As I just mentioned, Dr. John A. Chuback. Good morning, Dr. Chuback. How are you today?
Greetings, Paul. I'm doing great. Nice to see you again. Looking forward to today.
All right, we're going to dive in just a moment. And the CEO of Chuback Medical Group, Dr. Diane Chuback. Good morning, Dr. Diane Chuback. How are you today?
Good morning, Dr. Paul, and to Deborah and John, and let's get going. I'm excited.
All right, sounds good. And from San Diego, California, psychologist and author, Dr. Deborah Waitley. Good morning, Deborah Waitley. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm great. It's always so good to be here with all of you.
Yep, great to have you with us. And Dr. John A. Chuback, if you're ready to go, why don't you dive in the blueprint to your success story? We're starting today with the word ego. Why don't you take it from there?
Great. Ego is a noun, and the definition has two parts. Part one is the opinion that you have about yourself, a person's sense of self-esteem and self-importance. Number two, the part of the mind that mediates between the conscious and the unconscious and is responsible for reality testing and a sense of personal identity. Then we go into my short essay about the word ego and how I feel that successful people and others sort of think about and deal with this word. There's an old expression that says, "Don't be so humble. You're not that great." The reality is, like it or not, that every winner has a robust ego. That does not have to be a bad thing. Sadly, having a big ego has become synonymous with being a jerk or being full of yourself. Now, this is not to say that some people with enormous egos aren't jerks. Some are. But there's a difference between having a healthy ego and being an egotist. It's like the difference between being wealthy and being an elitist. The two things are totally unrelated. A military general cannot command troops if he isn't full of confidence. An astronaut cannot strap herself into a spacecraft loaded with tons of highly combustible rocket fuel unless she feels she is as good or better than anyone else in the nation to carry out her mission. The reality is that superachievers require a hefty ego to fuel the confidence required to do extraordinary things. Where an ego can be, and often is, a major dilemma, is when it is possessed by an individual of limited skills and capability. This can be a recipe for disastrous results. For example, strapping yourself into a rocket when you have no idea what the hell you're doing is not a setup for success. The individual must have a realistic notion of his or her true ability and never make the dangerous mistake of overestimating it. The ego should follow the person's ability and achievement. It should not be a product of unwarranted narcissism. It's okay if your surgeon or pilot or train engineer feels up to the job, as long as they have the training and experience to back it up. Put yourself in a position to have a well-developed ego through proper education, work, and training. This will allow you to become a leader in your field. Do not, on the other hand, overestimate your true self-worth, as this could result in great losses in every area of your personal and professional life. And then we come to a quote by John Lennon, who unfortunately was taken from us too early, again on the streets of New York, at the age of 40. He lived between 1940 and 1980. He was a singer, songwriter, record producer, artist, writer, and activist. And John Lennon said, If being an egomaniac means I believe in what I do and in my art or music, then in that respect, you can call me that. I believe in what I do, and I'll say it.
Excellent. We could almost spend the next 6 hours on this one word alone, but I promise we won't. Let's turn to the
Only
CEO.
1 hour, right?
Right. Let's turn to the CEO of Chuback Medical Group, Dr. Diane Chuback. Your thoughts on the word ego?
Well, when I think of ego, in terms of a definition, I think of, well, this is like our sense of self-worth, our sense of what our abilities are. And then when we put it in the context of success, so in my thinking, and I was just trying to read and just look up some stuff about this, and you find that in the literature of personal development, the idea of ego being either essential to your success or a complete liability to your success. I mean, that it's split right down the middle. So you could find just as many articles and things to read that support either side. But interestingly enough, I think it comes down to the balance, right? When you think of the economics of it, right? Everything's about a balance, supply, demand, the invisible arm, and how everything just balances itself for better. And in fact, I mean, this word is going to mesh in very nicely with the next word we're going to do, but I won't get ahead of myself. So this idea of the economics of ego, I started to find, and in fact, there is a book called Egonomics, and which is very interesting. And basically, what it says is that how it could be a liability is basically if you're looking and you're striving for achievement, the best way not to build your ego, because basically you'd be, or to your success, is to be building an ego that really has no underpinnings, that's not really real. And therefore you'd be building kind of a house of cards, because you're just setting yourself up for disappointment, kind of disaster, just not success in the eyes of other people. And basically, these are people who are just more concerned with achievement for the sake of looking good in the eyes of others. For people who, when they're putting forth an argument about something or just a discussion or debate, they don't really hear the other side, and they actually become defensive about it. And these are kinds of things that in the workplace or even in personal relationships, that people would start to call you kind of an egomaniac in that sense. You're feeling the need to constantly showcase your intelligence or your brilliance. And there's not enough focus on your personal best, but, more about just being better than the other guy. So this is not a healthy ego to build, in terms of really striving for success. Now, on the other hand, what they suggest in the book, Egonomics, is to practice, obviously, humility. I mean, that goes without saying, but when you think about it, it sets you up on a standpoint for so many other things. I mean, when you are basically humble, you think, less about yourself. In other words, you think less of yourself. It's not about thinking less of yourself, just about, thinking of yourself less. And so it's just also, be curious, be collaborative. You're not the only guy in the room with, ideas. I think that in general, we are all smarter as a group than one of us singly. So these are the kinds of things. And also just, be open. And this is, again, a humility, be humble, asks a trusted friend, can I get a little feedback on, how do you think I performed in that meeting? Or how do you think I did with this or that? So it's really, we have to build our success based on a healthy ego, something that's firmly, has a basis, a foundation.
All right, excellent. Let's turn to psychologist and author from San Diego, California, Dr. Deborah Waitley. Your thoughts on the word ego?
Yeah, this is great. This has really been set up well, because I think dovetailing off what Diane has been talking about really comes down to what is healthy and how can I have a balanced ego. So ego has been given a bad reputation. He's got an ego, and that's considered bad. But ego really, if you look at the psychological definition, it's really our center of consciousness. So it's our sense of self and our self-identity. So it's who and what we think we are and what we identify with. So ego, there's so many ways, as Diane said, there's so many ways it can help us with our success, so many ways it can be a detriment. So when the ego goes bad, that's when we have challenges in life. Everything from, I don't know who I am. I built my ego around success or this definition of success, but I lost my job. The economy crumbled. I don't know who I am anymore. So we go through life challenges and our ego's tested because we lose that foundation, as Diane was saying, that sense of self. So that's a case where a healthy ego becomes, what is my foundation? What's my center of consciousness? How do I relate with the world? Who am I? It comes down to that famous quote, know thyself. And what or who is the self? And is it built on a house of cards? Is it built on, we talked before about extrinsic motivation and values and things? Like, who are you with or without your things in life? Who are you without your role? So you want to come down to, and I think it comes down to, who am I? Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, I think, said it best. Are we, and he says, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. So I think we really need to look at who we are based on what we want in life. How do we define success? How do we define ourselves in relation to that? And who are we without all the trappings in our life? And I think that comes down to foundationally our identity with self. That's a healthy ego.
Mm-hmm. I think about all of the athletes and musicians who have egos that are out of this world. And one of the ones that comes to mind right away is Michael Jordan. Now, there's a guy with an ego the size of the planet, yet it never got in the way. He thought he was probably the best player of all time. He thought he was going to go win every game. And I don't see a problem with that because he didn't use it or abuse it. He was also humble, as you said. A couple of you said that. And he never said, you're no good, I'm great. In fact, I don't even think he said he was great. He just went out there and performed at a level of high greatness, a tremendous ego. A semi-humorous story. Somebody from my high school days, so that's 150 years ago at least, wrote to me and checking how I was doing, that kind of stuff after 150 years. And she said, I still remember you as having the biggest ego in the entire high school. Well, that surprised the heck out of me. I just went about my business and did my work, and a couple other people chimed in as well. So I called my best friend. He's my best friend since 5 years old, went to high school, and we're still best friends. And I said, a couple of people are saying I had a massive ego in high school. Did I? And he said, oh, no. He goes, you were very confident in your abilities, but I never saw an ego problem or an arrogance problem. Well, good. Okay, that was good, but they saw it differently. And so maybe, John, let me ask you, is there a point where you get from healthy ego, as we've been discussing, into the level of arrogance? Is there a point where it's no longer a healthy ego? It's kind of working against you?
Of course. And, as always, I'm taking copious notes here with all the great remarks everybody has shared. Yeah, that's always the concern. And it goes back to some of the fundamentals that we keep harping on in this program. And I'm sure we'll continue to circle around to that idea, the idea of balance. And, I think Diane's quote that she brought to the table today was really powerful, unbelievable. Don't think less of yourself, think of yourself less. I mean, this is powerful. And when Deborah's talking about the ego being kind of at the center of the consciousness, between those two statements that Diane and Deborah brought forth, I jotted a note here, which I think is pretty good. I mean, I said there's a difference between being self-centered and having a centered self.
Good.
I think being self-centered is pathology, Paul, to answer your question, and I think having a centered self is really a beautiful goal. and probably represents tremendous harmony in the human psyche and the human condition. And again, confidence is a virtue, arrogance is an affliction. But those two things are very, very closely related. It's like anything else. Exercise is healthy until you take it to an extreme and you wear out both knees and both hips, and maybe you're gravely underweight and so on and so forth. Water is excellent and necessary for normal physiological function. But unfortunately, we've heard tragic stories of fraternity hazing events and so forth, where alcohol had been prohibited and young pledges were forced to drink so much water they died from water toxicity. So water can be poisonous. Oxygen is healthy. Oxygen in room air is 21% of the air that we breathe. If you put a patient on a ventilator in an intensive care unit, which I've done many, many times in my life, and you leave them at 100% oxygen, within a few days, not weeks or months or years, within a few days, they'll develop oxygen toxicity to the lung, and the lung will have irreversible damage, and the patient will suffocate to death. So, as you and I talk about in many of our programs, Paul, anything taken to an extreme, it seems, no matter how innocuous it appears to be, can become pathological, destructive, life-threatening, threatening to relationships, threatening to employment, threatening to your professional position in life. So, yes, there is a point at which we cross the line, or run the risk of crossing the line, from confidence and self-esteem to arrogance and pathology, which can be tremendously destructive to ourselves and the people around us.
Okay, one quick comment, then another question for each of you before we move on. I've never met anybody who was successful, whether largely successful, hugely successful, or whatever, who didn't have a healthy ego. Not a negative one, not one where they went over the line, but they were confident in their abilities. And I recently came across a guy who was probably, he's definitely in the top 3 of all time, beginning of history until now, as composer of band music played by elementary, middle school, and high school. And he does some college and some professional. He also works with the Ohio State marching band. He's their chief arranger. The guy, phenomenal composing skills. And I used to play his music all the time as a kid, and as a band director, we played his music because he's great. He truly, his compositional skills are off the charts great. And I had a chance to talk to him recently. I thought, well, here we go. I'm going to just get slammed because he's, how great thou art, which was a terrible mistake on my part, because this guy is probably the nicest, most humble man I've ever met in my life. Now, he could throw his weight around. He could say, I'm so-and-so, you're less than that, and go on. And I've seen some people do that before, but not this guy. He knew he was great. He just didn't wear it on his sleeve. He just went home and wrote his music and talked to people like he's a regular human. Dr. Diane Chuback, have you ever come across anybody in your personal or professional life, and you've done quite a bit, where you came across somebody who was successful who didn't have some level of an ego and they believed in themselves and their abilities?
Well, I mean, I think that, when I used to teach, I used to see very different levels of confidence in students. And, so many of them, the ones that were sort of balanced on what I thought was an ego of really not a strong basis, generally got themselves in trouble academically more, whereas the other ones who, had a strong base, worked hard, but still were confident, did better. So I think that, that was, the best example I could think of.
Okay. Deborah Waitley, how about you? Does success go hand in hand with a healthy ego? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Yes. I mean, I think it depends how you define success. I think that's really important, and every individual has their own definition of that. If you define ego as according to a sense of self-worth and self-confidence, then absolutely, for you to live a rewarding, fulfilling, successful life in whatever endeavor you choose, that is important to know who you are and know what you want and be engaged in life. And I love, like John Lennon's quote said, I'm engaged, he said, I believe in what I do and I'll say it. So it's believing, having that belief in what you do. And John, I love the powerful quote. It's not self-centeredness, but centered in self. And I think that's really important.
Dr. John Chuback, any final thoughts on the word ego before we move along?
Yeah, I guess the final thought would be that again, we all kind of come at this material from our own perspective and our own background, our own experience. And I go back again and again to the example of the surgeon. I mean, you have to ask yourself, if you were a surgeon and you honestly believed in your heart that there was someone who could do a particular operation better than you, would it be ethical for you to operate on people, or at least do that operation on people? And I think the answer is obviously no. I mean, you don't have to believe that you're the best in the world and that nobody could do it as well as you, but you really have to get to a point in whatever your profession is, I think, to achieve excellence and expertise and superiority in terms of your profession. You have to believe that you're as good as anybody out there. Otherwise, it would be unethical to perform. I mean, an airline pilot who really felt that he wasn't up to snuff should really not be flying people. So you have to have a sense of self-worth, self-confidence. And again, that comes from all the other things that we talk about in our programs and in this program: study, preparation, practice, repetition, professionalism, and all these other great words that we're going to get to. But yeah, that would be my last thought, that generally you want to get yourself to a point where you really feel that you're as good as anybody else. And there's no reason you shouldn't feel that way. With proper practice and education and training and so forth, each of us should be really highly competent at whatever it is that we're doing. And if we're not, then we've got to go back and do some more work and do some more study before we decide to act in any kind of meaningful way, because then we can put other people at risk, whether you're driving an Uber or driving a bus or flying an airplane. It's a big responsibility. Most professions do have some level of responsibility. Teaching is a perfect example, as Diane said. That's a huge responsibility to educate the young people of our country. And if you're ill-equipped to teach well and you're ill-prepared for the classroom and so forth, you need to go back and check your ego a little at the door and say, maybe I'm not as good as I think I am, and maybe I could do a little bit better.
All right, very well said, sir. If we can move along now, the next category in your book, emotional intelligence. Why don't you take it from there?
Yeah, I think this should be a very, very interesting discussion, especially with the panelists that we have assembled. Emotional intelligence, known as EI, or emotional quotient, EQ, and I've heard it referred to as the emotional IQ also. It's a noun, and the definition is: emotional intelligence can be defined as the ability to monitor one's own and other people's emotions, to discriminate between different emotions and label them appropriately, and to use emotional information to guide thinking and behavior. And then I go into my short essay here. Most winners happen to have a high emotional intelligence, EI. Historically, this has not been a concept that has been well understood. Therefore, very few people have had the insight to work at consciously developing a greater emotional intelligence. But make no mistake about the fact that this is a skill area that can be cultivated and trained to be more robust. The individual who lacks emotional intelligence tends to be highly reactive and find themselves in compromised circumstances in various areas of their life. The idea of emotional intelligence and how to develop it is new to many well-educated people who have put enormous amounts of time and effort into other areas of personal development. I strongly suggest that if you wish to be highly successful a highly successful individual, that you investigate and study this highly rewarding area of growth and maturation. I certainly recommend that you begin with the works of Dr. Daniel Goleman, who has proven himself to be a thought leader in this fascinating and immensely valuable aspect of character expansion and improvement. I recommend you begin with his books Emotional Intelligence and Focus. You may also enjoy his presentation on emotional intelligence in Big Think via YouTube. Feelings, emotions, yours and those of others, are just as powerful as thoughts. They influence perception and perspective, and consequently behavior and decision making, shaping your world and the world of others. Therefore, emotions should be noted and examined. How do you want your behavior to affect your workplace and home environment? How far do you allow the emotions of others to control your environment? How do you react to others' emotional responses? Reading emotions, learning the art of being tuned into your feelings and those of others will aid in your choice of response. How you react will be up to you. Your actions, your decisions can make a huge difference regarding your life journey. How you understand and react to emotions is key to good, clear decision making and the successful outcome. And then we go to a quote from Daniel Goleman, PhD, born in 1946, author, psychologist, and science journalist, who said, "What really matters for success, character, happiness, and lifelong achievements is a definite set of emotional skills, your EQ, not just purely cognitive abilities that are measured by conventional IQ tests."
All right, let's turn right away first this time to author and psychologist from San Diego, California, Dr. Deborah Waitley. I'm guessing this is a really big deal in the field of psychology. So why don't you take it from there, emotional intelligence?
Yes, it really is. And I just think this is great that we are talking about this in the context of success. And in my career over the last 20 years, emotional intelligence has been a hard sell, particularly in corporations that I've gone into work with and train, and large consulting firms where we're trying to help them manage their teams and have an engaged workforce. Hugely important. Yet there's this resistance to that's just soft skill stuff. Oh, that's all touchy feely stuff. So that was always a barrier that we had. Now we're seeing it in hiring assessments and tools. Like now, top management doesn't even want to promote or hire people that don't rate high in emotional intelligence. And it's also equated with number of promotions and salary. So it definitely has been proven that it helps with success. What I find important about understanding emotional intelligence, and I happen to be certified in this, so this is an area that I definitely wanted to probe more in my career. There's 4 aspects. One is your self-awareness. So how aware are you of your own emotions and feelings and how you come across to other people? And then the other is self-management. So are you able to manage yourself in relation to others? The other is social awareness. How aware are you of the environment, how others are responding to you, picking up the cues and nuances so that you're better able to manage those relationships. And success is all about working with others, accomplishment of your objectives through others. So here, I think, and Diane brought this up earlier, it is tied with ego. And this is a way to, as John said, check your ego. How emotionally aware are you? Or is it just about yourself? And someone with a high EQ is going to have an ego that is consciously aware of how they're coming across to others and managing those relationships. It's not just about them. That's having a high EQ. And empathy is a core competency for emotional intelligence. How empathic are you?
Well, you talked about helping out with businesses with your skills. That has to be huge, as in off the charts huge, for leaders to understand what's going on with their people in terms of how they're going to react emotionally, right, to whatever decision they've made or whatever they're about to say.
Absolutely. And I'll just say that a lot of the training has to do with assessments that will identify people's different personality traits and behaviors, and then working on exercises to effectively communicate through those differences and not stay stuck in your own, but be able to have that kind of resiliency and situational leadership where you can adjust and be flexible to different styles. Yeah, it's really important.
All right, very well said. CEO of Chuback Medical Group, Dr. Diane Chuback, your thoughts on emotional intelligence?
Yes, I mean, just right off of what Deborah says, situational leadership and Ken Blanchard and all of that, and he talked a lot about emotional intelligence, and but I first heard about it when Dr. Goleman's book came out, and I remember, I mean, my undergraduate degree was in psychobiology. I don't know that they really classify that major like that anymore, but that's the way it was, but what it was called. And then, of course, I went on to do my graduate degree in neuroscience. But it was when I was a graduate student, and funny enough, I mean, I was doing stuff that was a little bit more technical. I was working on the cellular level and doing cell biology and things like that. But that pull to psychology, anytime I heard something, I was always still very interested in that other side of, okay, what was our brain doing? Um, I remember having one of my professors suggested an essay that Dr. Goleman wrote about emotional intelligence, and I remember having like a journal, like a book club type of meeting with about that. And I was fascinated by it, and it stuck with me. And that was toward the end of my education, where we were about to finish, and then John and I got married, and we were starting a family. And so, it's the kind of thing that just stuck with me in terms of like how I wanted to think about raising my children. Because now that I do work, and I am a leader of people and of the family and whatnot, but you always want to think about how you're raising your children, and I want to raise my children as being thoughtful and being leaders and being empathetic people. And so I had read an article that talked about the association of like how children react to music, and to keep music very constant, keep it as a very big constant in their lives. Whether you play a lot of music, you talk about music, you set them up for music lessons. So I did that. When from the time my kids were little, they were in little music classes. We lived in Rochester, so there were just plenty of things like that at the Eastman School of Music. The drums, the things that even when my daughter was a baby, we set the babies up in a circle and we would dance around and sing to them. Any outsider would think we were crazy, but just keeping all that music, because that music, it appeals to a certain part of the brain. Some people call it like the primitive brain, but like that limbic area that controls emotion and memory. And it calms us. So, and I feel like when children are brought up with music as a big part of their lives, they're able to control their emotions, feel their emotions, be in touch with their emotions. And when they have a sense of their own, I think they have a much better sense of others as well. And that's what this is basically like social intelligence, where you can, not only control your own emotions in a certain situation, be appropriate, but also read other people well. So anyway, so that was kind of my story about that. And John knows that that's something that I talked about a lot when the kids were little. And to this day, I 2 out of 3 are pretty accomplished musicians, and my daughter is a vocalist. So, so they also, created a nice talent for themselves on the side. But at the same time, I think they all are extremely emotionally intelligent.
All right, vocalists are musicians too.
Indeed. Right? Indeed. The vocal cords. Play your vocal cords.
There used to be a running joke in the School of Music. Well, the musicians are over here, the singers are over there, and they would, hey, we're musicians too. And of course they were. They had to learn the music and perform as well. So, mostly my entire career was leadership. That's what I did. Teaching first of hundreds of kids, but the majority of my career was school principal. And so I always had to lead, which meant a lot of meetings, meant a lot of one-on-ones, one-on-fives, and then maybe 1-on-50. And I always made it a point to not only get the general feel of the crowd as to what I was presenting, because I was always pushing the agenda. I didn't sit back and relax. Okay, we've done this well. Could we do it better later on? Could we change this a little bit? And of course, that makes people uncomfortable. It's like, oh, he's changing things again. Well, I wasn't changing things again. I was just trying to move people forward. So I try to get a general feel of the group. but then I would try to zero in on each individual. Okay, he's buying it, she's not, she might come around, he's thinking of slashing my tires after the meeting, and so on and so forth. And so I would sometimes, maybe always, have to shift a little bit during the presentation so I could bring those people who were thinking, I don't think it's a good idea. I had to bring them around to get them at least to think about it. And the ones who were going to slash my tires, I figured, well, they're lost causes anyway. But maybe they'll come around when the other 45 people are doing it. So, I'm fully aware of the emotional intelligence aspect only because I had to do it, for my entire career. Dr. John A. Chuback, back to you, sir. You've heard 3 people talk on this. Your thoughts on emotional intelligence and what you've heard.
Great stuff, as always. I think I'm thinking a little bit about what Deborah said and how some of her corporate clients, et cetera, initially, early on, were very resistant to this concept. And that, it kind of falls in, we always, tease Dr. Dennis Whaley, who, kind of puts some of these things in the woo-woo category, like, it's not exactly hard science,
Okay.
But although he understands this subject very, very well, I know that. A concept like this can be difficult to grasp. That's part of the reason people reject it. They don't really know what you're talking about. And I was noticing this morning in my preparation for today's show that I felt that this was one area where the exercise at the bottom of the section, I think, is really, really valuable. And I'm going to actually read that because I feel like it gives a more concrete feeling for people who aren't really in tune with what we're talking about here and what emotional intelligence really is. So we go on to say, as part of the exercise, in your story, how would you like your character to react to certain emotional triggers? So I think that's something that probably more people resonate with. There are emotional triggers in life, at the workplace, at home, in relationships, and suddenly it puts it in a different perspective, I think. What steps would they take to get to a place where they were more in tune with their emotions? And that's a little woo-woo, being, in tune with your emotions. But let's go on. How can you learn to think before you react? That's more concrete. And I think that's something that probably resonates with people. And I want to touch on that a little more in a second. Do you see this as an issue that can be improved upon in your life? How do you think a lack of emotional intelligence holds you back? Do you have a quick temper? Are you easily offended or hurt by criticism? Write out your thoughts and feelings about this below. So I think that some of those things, like the emotional triggers, the quick temper, thinking before you react, being easily offended or hurt, those are more concrete examples of how emotional intelligence is actually expressed and manifested in our lives, both personally and professionally. So I would bring to that the incredible work that we quote often and we go back to many, many times of Dr. Viktor Frankl, who was a Viennese psychiatrist, a Jewish psychiatrist in the war years, World War II, held in a camp under the Nazis. And he came through that experience and went on to write Man's Search for Meaning. And in that book, one of the essential concepts is the one thing that no one can ever take from you is the control of your own mind, of your own behavior, and how you react to circumstances. He was in a very abusive, oppressive, dark, terrible, pathological condition, but he never allowed that stimulus to impact his response, his emotional response, his behavior, et cetera, et cetera. Incredible human being. Most of us could never, ever live up to that standard. And most people, by his account, did not. Most people reacted as most of us would, reactively. You hurt me, I want to hurt you back. You hurt me, I hate you. Whereas a high emotional intelligence, like a Viktor Frankl, you're talking about an emotionally intelligent Einstein, so to speak. I mean, brilliant level of emotional intelligence on a man like that. That's a very, very simple litmus test. When we're in a situation and something occurs, there's some sort of stimulus, an action happens, or a statement is made, words are exchanged. If we start with emotional intelligence at that fundamental level and say, that's what Viktor Frankl pointed out very clearly, between the moment of the action or the statement and your reaction, there's a period of time. And most people miss that period of time. Most people let that period of time elapse and they simply react. They have a knee jerk reaction, an emotional reaction. Whereas Frankl was teaching, take that moment, not to react, but to respond, to think and respond, and ask yourself, how do I really want to behave in this situation? If our listeners, if ourselves, if myself could begin with that exercise, that's simple but not easy, simple in concept but not easy to do. If you could achieve that level of emotional intelligence, you would be way, way up on the scale. That is a powerful, powerful ability to possess, to respond in life, especially in the difficult moments, rather than to react.
And that can be used everywhere. We've been talking about the workplace business. It can be used on one relationships, marriages, your relationships with kids, and pretty much everybody under the sun, right, John? You're muted.
Sorry about that. Absolutely, it's important for everyone and in every situation. And I think it's something, and we go back to this idea again, that should be taught beginning in childhood. And and it is taught to a certain extent. I mean, the idea that everybody's not allowed to speak at once and talk over each other and shout out their idea, that's teaching emotional intelligence. And that's been around a long time. Now, it may not have been called emotional intelligence. In that regard, it's probably called good manners, being polite, waiting your turn. But it is an exercise in emotional intelligence, I think. And one of my mentors, again, who's left us now and has moved on, as we like to say, to the next step of the eternal spiritual journey, Bob Proctor. He was at his seminars, he would give out a coin that he had produced, and you could purchase those coins, which I did. I purchased many of them. I have them, and I give them to friends, and I give them to staff members. And it's the simplest thing in the world. It's obviously a two-sided coin, and on the one side, it simply says react, and the surface of the coin is very rough. The way he had it manufactured is very rough. The other side says respond, and the surface of the coin is very smooth. And he said, if you would keep that in your pocket when you're going into circumstances that you thought might be, difficult, a business meeting, a negotiation, whatever it is, a divorce proceeding, whatever situation you might be going into, if you just had that in your pocket and you held it in your hand, that tactile stimulus would remind you that if you react, life and this situation is more likely to be rough. If you respond, life and this situation that you're dealing with is more likely to be smooth. So respect that fractional moment of time between the moment that something happens or someone says something. Most of us have had a fender bender. It's easy to have a fender bender and come out of the car screaming and yelling and blaming the other guy. And you just sit in the car for 2 seconds and just say, okay, these things happen. Somebody, I got to deal with it. And then you come out and then you behave differently. You say, wow, that guy was really pretty nice guy, or she was a really nice lady. The way that she handled that was impressive. That's emotional intelligence. And we could use some more of that in the world, and we're all working on it, myself included, that's for sure.
All right, we do want to get to the next word, but before we do, Diane and Deborah, can we get 30 seconds or so of your reaction to everything you've heard so far? Any final thoughts? Diane, first, on emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I would say emotional intelligence, as John describes with Viktor Frankl, that is to have that level of emotion, that is the ultimate level of maturity. And when we think about like childhood development and, and so throughout their formative years, I mean, and through adulthood, they're at different levels, gaining maturity. But, the most important thing is for them to, not just the empathy part, but just tolerance, and I think we need more of that also in this world. Tolerance and understanding things that you don't understand, and to just not like, rush to judgment. Someone's of obviously a different race, a different religion, eats different types of foods. Children have to understand that there are differences in culture. And the more that I think the earlier, the age that they're exposed to these kinds of things and to be more accepting of others, I think the more likely they're on a trajectory toward a very nice level of emotional intelligence.
Yeah, very well said. Dr. Deborah Waitley, of course, this is the basis of psychology in so many ways, but you have any final thoughts on emotional intelligence?
I would bring it back to what John brought up earlier, self-centering, centering in yourself, and not becoming emotionally trigger happy. I mean, that's all over the place. We react because of an emotional trigger that we perceive threatens our ego or our identity. So when we're trying to protect our ego, we tend to react instead of take a moment of mindfulness in the moment, become self-aware, and respond with more of that intelligence and bringing that in. So I think that's really important. Just center yourself in that.
Yeah, great way to put it. Dr. John A. Chuback, any final thoughts, or would you like to move on to the word enjoy?
Yeah, one quick quote that I love that I think fits here. As Diane said, through different levels of maturity and experience and growth, especially when you have children, you watch them grow up and you see their emotional intelligence developing over those years. Even when we have children who are young adults, professionals, and we're still watching that and still trying to guide that process and so forth. But as you get older and you look back, you realize there's nothing like experience to help you build that emotional intelligence. And you can try to teach it, but it's hard to teach. People, all of us need to go through life and have these experiences. And with time, hopefully, if we are thoughtful and conscientious and aware of such concepts, then we can climb that ladder of emotional intelligence. But it reminds me of a cute quote from Mark Twain in terms of the value of personal experience. Mark Twain said, "A man who carries a cat by the tail learns a lesson he can learn in no other way." So sometimes, you have to go through it, yourself.
Yeah.
Somebody could explain it to you, well, you should behave this way and you should behave that way. It would be better if you would, calm down and give a moment before you spoke and so forth. But we all learn through experience and through observation that it's the person who handles those difficult moments the best. Those people seem to be rising in the ranks, not just professionally, but in their personal lives. And it's quite inspiring to see somebody who can handle those tough situations well. But it comes through real life experience, I think, to a great extent.
Yep. Yeah, very much so. All right, sir. Let's continue on with our third word in our remaining time, the word enjoy.
This is a great word. I had a cousin who's gone now, unfortunately, but he always used to say, you should enjoy your life. And the way he said the word enjoy almost sounded like he was chewing on a piece of cake or something. It was, and he really did enjoy his life. Unfortunately, he left us too soon, but so it's a special word for me. And I think it's one that we have to look at carefully here before we get into it, because with all of this achievement stuff we talk about, which is important, and success and winning and all that stuff, if you're not enjoying that process, you're missing out on the whole point of life, I think. So let's get into this word. Enjoy is a verb with the definition to take pleasure in something. Now my essay quickly here. Successful people enjoy life. It's that simple. The game of life is not about who dies with the most chips, but who has the most meaningful, enjoyable ride. This means spending time with those you love and who love you. If you don't have relationships like that in your life, perhaps your idea of success is solely monetary. You may find that a short lived joy. It is essential to travel, see different parts of the country and the world, enjoy great foods, participate in sports and other leisure activities. This is why you work so hard, so you can thoroughly enjoy all the magnificent experiences life has to offer. Life is so beautiful. Experience it to its fullest. Share these moments with your friends and family. A good meal always tastes better when it's enjoyed with others. Don't fall into the trap where we're here only to work, only to study, only to earn and to save. There must be a balance to life. The motivation to work hard should be in the desire to afford wonderful happenings and events. Dream big dreams. Set lofty goals for yourself in terms of the pleasurable activities you would like to take part in. Do exceptional things. Exercise what Brian Tracy calls blue sky thinking, and don't live on a place called someday I'll. In other words, don't be a person who goes from saying, someday I'll do this or someday I'll do that to a person who regretfully admits, I wish I had done this or I wish I had done that. I wonder what enjoyable experiences you would share in if you would unlock your inner desires. Would you fly in a hot air balloon? Would you get your pilot's license? Would you go to Paris in the springtime? Would you take a cruise around the world? Would you buy a ticket on Virgin Galactic for a space flight? Would you plan a simple picnic in the park with your significant other for the first time in years, or maybe for the first time ever? Do you even own a proper picnic basket and a blanket? These pleasures need not be costly or extravagant to hold an immeasurable degree of value. Be focused on planning and then living such events. This is your life. As they say, this is not a dress rehearsal. You will never have these days, weeks, months, and years back. Use them wisely and get from them all you can. Again, life can be an unimaginably remarkable journey, but it won't play out that way by chance. You need to be fixated on the realization of a lifetime of enjoyment and pleasurable occasions. Sit down and think hard about what you want to have, do, and see. Make a list, and on that list, put dates alongside each of these desires. Make sure each one happens for you. No one else is going to see to it that they actually materialize for you. Life is for living and enjoying. Don't miss the whole point of what we're doing here. And then we come to a quote by the great Earl Nightingale, 1921 to 1989, who was an American radio personality, writer, speaker, and author. He said, "We are at our very best and we are happiest when we are fully engaged in work we enjoy on the journey toward the goal we've established for ourselves. It gives meaning to our time off and comfort to our sleep. It makes everything else in life so wonderful, so worthwhile."
That's great. I wish we had 5 or 6 hours to spend on this word too, because we could go on forever about all the great aspects of the word enjoy. Dr. Diane Chuback, your thoughts on the word enjoy?
So, just off of what John said about, enjoying and life is not just about constant work and drudgery and, asking ourselves, like, what is this all for? When we think of why we were put on this planet, or when you think about all of the living organisms on this planet, and you say, well, what differentiates us as human beings versus all other animals is that, the one thing we have in common is that we're all here, from an evolutionary standpoint, just to survive, right? It's natural selection is all about survival. However, we as humans and our cognitive abilities and our social skills with one another, we have that desire. We have dreams. We like to express ourselves. We like to enjoy things and to reach goals that we derive a lot of enjoyment from. So, some of us are better than this than others. There are people that go through life that really don't enjoy themselves. They save every penny they've ever made and, like to look at it tick up in the bank. But, as John says often, money in the bank only serves the banker. It's all about living and enjoying while you're living.
Yeah.
I think that so much about, when people say, well, I don't know how to enjoy. What do I do? How do I find what I find enjoyable? And, but I remember when I first started my journey with personal development, it was right around the time I was about to go back for my MBA around 2014, 2015. And the buzzwords at that time were find your why, what is your, what is the expression, your north, your, what is the expression of, like your northern star kind of thing, what guides you, and your true north. And so these were the kinds of things. And I remember there was a guy, Simon Sinek, that was kind of blowing up YouTube at the time, and he was like, find your why, it's all about your why. And he would do these exercises with people, and people would bring him to different parties, and they'd say, oh wow, that was really incredible, now I really understand why I'm doing certain things and why I gravitate toward that I really enjoy, but I didn't understand why I did that. So for people who have a hard time enjoying their lives, maybe some of these exercises would be great. So for instance, what Simon talks about is, so he says, okay, do this exercise with your best friend. Now this can't be a family member, or it can't be, anyone that's too close to you, but like someone you choose, the two of you choose to be best friends. And you ask that person, if I called you at 3:00 in the morning, with a problem, you would do anything for me, right? And he's like, yeah, why? Well, because you're a really good guy. No, really, why? Well, because, I don't know, I enjoy being around you. Yeah, but why? And so when you get back to those things, you find out that maybe it's because when you're in the room, I feel like my best self. I enjoy you as a friend. And so now I understand why we're friends. So, just to go through that exercise to find out, like, why you enjoy that. Like, so for instance, John and I just celebrated our eldest son's law school graduation. And I have to say it was one of the happiest days of my life. And, you say, why? Well, okay, well, it's my son. He's achieved something really, really great. But why? And, when I had to go back, and I realized, looking at him in that graduation regalia, I mean, it goes back to just a very core thing in me, which was driven into me by my mother. It was just about education. And that was just something that, it's just such a strong value of mine. And to see, my son achieving something so high at level of education was just, I can't even think of more enjoyment really for me. So it's a kind of thing where, you really have to understand yourself, what drives you, what your whys are, and then, get to it, start enjoying life and understand yourself more.
All right. Very well said. Dr. Deborah Waitley, your thoughts on the word enjoy?
I'm so glad we're including this word in with a discussion on success, because it used to mean for me the opposite of success. If I was enjoying something, it would mean I wasn't goal achieving. I remember growing up with my father, no tension relieving, only goal achieving. So that kind of stuck in my head. So I felt this guilt if I was doing anything that would be enjoyable. And I remember in the height of my workaholic days, I would actually have to put on my day timer on my to-do list, go watch the sunset or go do something, so it became a to-do, and I realized there's something wrong with this picture. So I noticed that I'd gotten into autopilot, and it's really challenging in life to enjoy being in that state or moment of enjoyment if you're on autopilot and so driven to achieve your goals that you're missing out. Like John said earlier, the someday aisle. And my dad used to talk about that all the time. So what I've found is it's really important to, like we talked earlier, to have that self-awareness, to be in the moment and remind ourselves why we're here. And like Diane said, and so having a gratitude about being alive. So we can say, as a man thinketh, as I think in my mind and achieve my goals, so am I. As I feel, so am I. But to me, the very fact that we wake up in the morning and we're breathing, like we're here, is cause for joy. So I know it sounds kind of silly and maybe a little woo-woo or Pollyanna or idealistic, but I just think life is meant to celebrate just the fact that we're here. So I equate joy with celebration. And so now I'm trying to find joy in even the most mundane things in life. So people will say to me, well, yeah, you're doing all these things. Well, what do you do for enjoyment? Well, that is because I am getting enjoyment by the fact that I am so grateful to have the work I have, the friends I have, the relationships, And that brings me joy, just the day-to-day things that I do, just the fact of being alive.
Oh, that's great. I saw a cartoon once. I don't know if you know this cartoon. It's one of those a picture, one caption cartoons called the Lockhorns. Do you remember that one?
No, what is that?
Anybody? It was an older couple. They were probably 60 to 65, at least in the cartoon. That's what they appeared to be. And the husband and wife were always battling about something. That's why they called them the Lockhorns. They were locking horns all the time. And one time, the husband, was in the background, just dancing, acting like a fool, just having the time of his life, like in the living room. And she was in the kitchen. You could see the husband in the background. She was talking to a female friend of hers in the kitchen. In fact, the guy's name was John. I apologize for that, John. And she said, I don't know if John, remember he's 65. I don't know if John had a happy childhood, but he has certainly had a very long one. It still continues to this day. And I thought, that's the essence of it all. We've talked about that before, having the child in us, bringing the child out, never losing that. It gets shut down at a certain age. If we don't shut it down, then we have more time for enjoyment, right, John?
Yeah, it's it's funny. I think Diane accuses me of that quite a bit. I say things. She says, "John from Fairlawn," like when I was the kid growing up in Fairlawn, New Jersey.
Great.
Well, one of the things, bringing that all together and really touching on what Deborah just said, for our listeners, they really, I think, need to understand very sincerely, from our point of view, that the reason we do this program is because we really enjoy it. There really is no monetary incentive and so on and so forth. We really enjoy coming together and having these conversations. And what we enjoy so much about it is not just the conversations between the four of us and what we learn from one another and this fabulous experience, sort of intellectually stimulating experience, but it's the sharing with the listeners. It's the paying it forward. It's the passing along of the knowledge that we have, and all of us in this group. Although I think we all look fantastic, I think we're doing well for our age. But I remember Deborah's father. Now that I just thought of this moment, I think in the back somewhere, might have been Dennis or Earl Nightingale, or both, but they said, historically it was the elders, it was the community elders who were the philosophers of the tribe, and we're getting to that point where we have a lot of life experience. We've all been through quite a bit, and we've had quite a bit of success, and I think we feel a responsibility as elders. I guess we're on the young end of the elders group, but we're making it into that group now to share it with other people in the tribe who will listen and who are looking to have a better experience in life and a richer life, not just monetarily, but in terms of their enjoyment and their experiences and their personal relationships. So this is all about sharing. We enjoy this experience. It's one of our great pleasures to do this and take time out of our busy schedules to make this show a reality. And it reminds me, again, I've talked about this before, whenever Diane and I are on vacation with the children, typically you'll do a tour of a city or something and you'll see these monuments built to people. And I always remind them, they don't build monuments to people for what they got. They build monuments to people for what they gave. And I feel that we're giving in this process, and it really feels good. I know I can speak for all of us when I say that really feels good. And it's one of the things, like to Deborah's point, when her friends are asking her, why do you do this or that? We really, really enjoy this process of teaching, sharing, learning, discussing. It's a beautiful, beautiful process, I think.
Yeah, very well said. And that'll bring us to the close of episode number 7, The Blueprint to Your Success Story, Emotional Power Words and Workbook, all written by Dr. John A. Chuback. And let's thank our panel today from San Diego, California, psychologist and author, Dr. Deborah Waitley. Thank you for everything today. We will see you next time for episode 8.
Thank you so much. Thoroughly enjoyed this time together and sharing.
Excellent. You add so much, and we appreciate you being here. CEO of Chuback Medical Group, Dr. Diane Chuback. Same to you. Thank you for everything today. We'll see you next time as well.
Thank you. It was quite enjoyable, as Deborah said, and I would like everyone to enjoy their weekend.
All right. You got the word enjoy in some element there twice. Enjoyable and enjoy. That's great. And Dr. John A. Chuback, of course, thank you for writing the book and thank you for putting this all together. And we will see you next time, too.
Thank you very much. I'll just add one thing. Diane and I are really going to enjoy today because it's our 27th wedding anniversary. And
Congratulations.
So happy anniversary, my darling. And I bring that to light just to prove that we're definitely in the elders group.
All right. And on that note, we will end today. Thank you very much for listening and watching. We'll see you next time. The Blueprint to Your Success Story, when we will present to you episode number 8.